Namaste. I'm Swapna Gajjala from Austin, Texas. Welcome to Digital Mahila Dhyana Mahachakram 2 2020. We are very happy and excited to celebrate 30 years of PSSM movement founded by our Grand Master, Brahmarshi Pitamaha Patriji. I'm honored to introduce our guest speaker today, Ms. Dena Merriam from New York. Dena is a long-time meditation practitioner in the lineage of Kriya Yoga. She came in contact with her guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, at the age of 20, long after he had left his physical form. She devoted many years to practicing his teachings and studying the texts of ancient Vedic tradition. During her years of meditation, many vivid memories of past births began to emerge, and these memories became the subject of her books. The purpose of sharing these intimate stories was to help people see the long arch of their life, whether they retain memories or not, to help overcome fear and anxiety about death, to understand more fully the workings of cause and effect, and to know that each one of us, moment to moment, is creating the blueprint for our future. Her first book, My Journey Through Time, a spiritual memoir of life, death, and rebirth, takes Dena on a journey back through 7 consecutive lives, revealing the intricate patterns that emerge as one life leads into another. Her second book, The Untold Story of Sita, an empowering tale for our time, takes the reader back to a much earlier age, several thousand years BCE, to a pre-patriarchal era when humanity had not fully separated itself from the natural world. There are many messages from that time that are particularly relevant today. A third book called When the Bright Moon Rises, Awakening Ancient Memories will be released soon. A fourth book is also in the works, The Seeds of Satyayuga, recounts memories of a life in a far higher age and how events in that life affected subsequent births, carving a path for the soul's awakening. While on her spiritual journey of awakening, Dena has been active in the public sphere. She served as the vice chair, Millennium World Peace Summit of Religious and Spiritual Leaders held at the United Nations in New York in the year 2000. Having founded the nonprofit organization, the Global Peace Initiative of Women in 2002, she has worked to bring spiritual voices to address global challenges. She has spoken in many forums on the need for a shift in consciousness if we are to successfully address the ecological decline, economic and gender imbalance, climate instability, violence, and other critical issues. She received her master's degree from Columbia University and has served on numerous boards, and in 2014 received the Nivano Peace Prize for her international work. Hearty welcome, Dena Madam. We are blessed to have you with us today. The stage is all yours.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and I want to especially thank Patriji and all the members of the Pyramid Spiritual Society for how you have received this Sita book, which has been such a personal journey for me. I want to talk a little bit about how that affected me, because I in the book, in the introduction to the book, in the back of the book, I describe a little bit about my journey to Ayodhya and Vaishno Devi and the impact. I have a sensitivity for pilgrimage places. And so often when I'm in India, I do go to pilgrimage. I've been to Badrinath and Kedarnath and Gangotri, and I continue to go because they affect me very deeply. And often I get taken out of my current life and either go back in time or into another realm. But after I had these experiences and wrote the Sita book, I decided I wanted to organize a conference in India, in Varanasi, to launch the book. And it was November 2018. And I thought, well, I just need a few more months to finish the book. And so we planned for March of 2019 to gather in Varanasi. We sent out the invitations, we just secured the place. But I couldn't put the book aside. My editor kept saying, you got to get me the book if you're going to have it released by March. November came. I said to her, I'm not finished yet. December came. I said, I'm not finished yet. January came. She said, Dena, the book's not going to be ready. We have to proof it and design it. We need the book. And I realized that I couldn't let it go because I didn't want to leave what I call Sita Loka. I didn't want to leave my complete absorption in the reality of Sita. So I was reading the book again and again, changing a word, but I knew it was done, but I couldn't let it go. And I thought to myself, what's going to happen to me when this book is done? I mean, how will I stay connected to Sita? Finally, my editor insisted that I send it to her, and I did. We had just 2 months to get the book proofed and designed, and just a day before I was leave to India, at the book, I had a few printed copies of the book to bring with me. And we had the conference, and I had planned a pilgrimage. I always do when I'm in India, plan to go one new place. I decided to go to Dwarka. I had never been to Dwarka, and years before, I had a flash of Dwarka, and I said to myself, I know that I lived in Dwarka. I never connected to the Krishna of Vrindavan. I always connected to the Krishna of Dwarka. And so many of my friends used to love to sing about Gopal, Gopal. And it did not touch me deeply. It was always Krishna of Dwarka. So I took a pilgrimage to Dwarka, and it moved me very deeply. And I fell in love with Dwarka. And I came back, and a whole new series of stories came to me, of memories. And so I started writing about Rukmini. And I realized it was a continuation of the Sita book, because Sita's next birth was as Rukmini, and yet she's disappeared from history. We only know the story of how she married Krishna, how he eloped with her, and yet it was a completion in many ways of things that had been started during Ram and Sita's life. And so I knew there was a lot more there. And it was no longer the Treta Yuga. It was the end of Dwapara Yuga. Kali Yuga was approaching. So of course, the patriarchal worldview was much more embedded in the mind. And so Rukmini was just a queen. She was no more. But I discovered a lot more. And it was so mind-boggling to me to see what she achieved in terms of bedding a whole new series of collective thoughts. All of that will come out in my book, but I wanted to read a section of the book. And I also wanted to read some words from the Sita book, which affected me very deeply, because when I heard the Sita book, and I heard it, I was being taught, I was also learning. And there's a phrase in there that when I heard it, it just went into me so deeply. And I thought to myself, this is my lesson for this lifetime. And then we can talk about it, and then I'll read from the Rukmini book. This is when Sita's about to leave her body. And Soma, even though Soma knew it was happening, somehow Sita took that away from her mind so that she wouldn't be constantly living with the thought of separation. But at a certain moment, when Hanuman is there, Ram and Sita are about to take off, and Hanuman calls out, Mata. And then Soma's talking. It was then that I realized what was happening. In near panic, my mind cried out, you are leaving this world, aren't you, Mata? As this thought entered my mind, she paused. With such a loving look, she turned around and replied, how can I leave this world, Soma, when I am the world? When I heard those words, I can't describe the effect it had on me. And then Sita goes on and says, you of all people should know that. She clung to Sri Ram's arm as the two of them continued down the path that led into the forest. Hanuman started to follow them. Mata again turned around and said to him quietly, you must stay, Putra. Look after Soma and the children. Tears were rolling down his cheeks. I heard him whisper, Mata. She approached him and wiped his tears and gazed at him lovingly until she saw a smile across his face. She said in a gentle voice, this is a time for joy, not for tears. And as I finished the book, and as I said, I was so afraid of feeling Sita's absence. I would no longer be absorbed in this day after day after day, because that's what it was like for me every day, reading again to see if I wanted to change any word. And when I came to those lines, I thought, well, how is it possible for me to feel separate from Ram and Sita. I mean, she said it herself. How can I leave the world when I am the world? Which means that in every act that we do, in every person that we meet, we can see Ram and Sita, and we can know that we are in their presence. A few months later, first I was just trying to kind of make the transition and understand what was happening, and then I began to write. Then I had a draft of the Rukmini book about 6 months later, when something else came over me, and I began to have recollections of the Vedic days, going back maybe 8,000 BCE. And as I recall those times, I realized the soul who was born as Meenakshi received the curse. So it's a prelude to Meenakshi's story that comes out in the Sita book. So I didn't know what to do. I said to my friend, I've got these 2 stories I'm working on. I'm working on the Rukmini book, and yet I'm back in the Vedic ages. He said, if that story is coming, you put aside the Rukmini book. Now I understand why. I wrote that other book, which is When the Bright Moon Rises, Awakening Ancient Memories. The first part takes place in Vedic India, and then it moves into China. There's a lot about Devi Saraswati there in that book. And again, there's the women sages are very present in that book in that time. And I realized that I had to write that book to understand what was happening in the time of Rukmini. Now I'm going back and rewriting the Rukmini book with a different level of understanding. Each book for me is a different step on the journey. I gain deeper and deeper understanding. And now that I'm writing the Rukmini book or rewriting it, many stories about Sita are coming through, as you'll see in a passage that I'm going to read now. And so to me, it's an ongoing spiritual journey. I say to myself, when I finish the Rukmini book, what will come next? I don't want to leave. Now I'm very much in that world with Rukmini as Sita's rebirth, and I don't want to leave that world. Well, I've got a good 6 months left where I can continue, because I go over these things again and again to make sure I get it just right. Because I hear these things, and I want to make sure that I'm conveying what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing. Many, many stories are coming through in that book. And I see the tie. Everything is karmically linked. Nothing is independent from anything else. I'm also seeing how Sita and Ram, when they returned in the form of Krishna and Rukmini, they were helping with the evolution that was needed at that moment. It was a very different world. And of course, there was that great war, which had such significance, and was the ending of an era. And so much about that is the ending of an era and the beginning of a new era. So let me just read you a passage now, just to give some context to this. Rukmini is sitting with a group of women. She has an attendant called Anjali, who's more than her attendant. Anjali is a great yogini who is helping Rukmini with her work, which is really taking in those who are suffering in society, the women who've been rejected, and helping them build a new life. She's very focused on the society now. And I'm speaking in the first person as one of the women who've been taken in and had a tragedy in her life. And so before Rukmini arrives, the women are chattering and saying, what should we ask her to talk about? And one of the women says, well, let's ask her to talk about Krishna's escapades in Vrindavan. We love those stories. And another woman says, no. That was Krishna and Radha, and maybe she'll be jealous of Krishna's love for Radha. We shouldn't bring that up. We'll ask her about something else. So Rukmini arrives. Again, she's called Mata. For several minutes, Mata sat there quietly, continuing to look around. Finally, she said, I think some of you would like to hear of my meeting with Radha. You have met her? Asked Anjali in surprise. I've never heard that story. There are many stories you haven't yet heard, Anjali. Mata closed her eyes and for a few minutes sat in meditation. Then we heard her murmur, Radha, Radha, repeating her name as if caressing it. Opening her eyes, Mata said simply, she is well known to me. We waited for Ma to begin, but she just sat there as if recalling the presence of one who was very dear to her. After several long minutes, she began. I first met Radha before my marriage. Some of you will remember when I spoke about how Krishna would meet me in the forest behind the palace where I lived when I was a small child. At first, we would play together. He was very mischievous and would hide from me, but I would always find him. We played all sorts of games at first, but gradually, as my memories of my previous birth returned to me, and I began to practice long meditation, everything changed. I no longer met him in the forest, but would travel with him in my meditations. At that time in my life, my brother was beginning to confine me to my room in an effort to prevent me from escaping. Mata smiled as she remembered these scenes from her childhood. No matter what he did, he could not restrain me. I always found a way to escape his watchful eye and travel at will. But that is a story for another day. In those early meetings with Krishna, I had shared with him many stories of my childhood escapes, but I knew little of his life in Vrindavan and had long wanted to see for myself what his childhood there had been like. One day when I was meditating in my room, I found myself transported to a beautiful wooded area, one I didn't recognize. It was not the forest behind our palace that I had visited so many times. I have such love for forests and was glad to find this new place to explore. And so I walked and walked, admiring the trees and animals, until I came to the edge where the trees began to thin. There in the open pasture, I saw Krishna talking with a woman I knew immediately to be Radha. By this time, he had already left Vrindavan to live in Mathura, but there he was, standing by the side of Radha. He felt my presence and immediately looked my way, offering a broad smile and nod of his head. I stood there at the edge of the forest, not sure of what to do. But as soon as Radha saw him gazing in my direction, she turned around and, seeing me, ran to where I was standing. To my embarrassment, she bent over to touch my feet with both of her hands. Now Radha is quite a bit older than me, and I felt it was wrong, and so I said, "No, Radha, you are my elder. It is I who should touch your feet." But she refused to rise. And as her hands lay on my feet, she transmitted to me many scenes of the early years when she and the children of the area immersed themselves in Krishna's play. It was a most joyful experience and the fulfillment of a desire. Mata paused, and many minutes passed in silence. The world sees the outer form of Radha, but I see who she truly is. The women all waited to see whether she would reveal anything more. But when she spoke again, Mata told of another meeting with Radha. I had a second meeting with Radha years later, not long after my marriage. It had been quite some time since Radha had seen Krishna, and she was experiencing an intense longing for him. I felt her pain in my heart, and it followed me everywhere. Her longing became my longing. And yet every day I was in Krishna's presence. This piercing pain was like arrows in my heart, and it grew to such an extent that I could not sleep at night. I could not eat. I felt myself wasting away. Radha's eyes became my eyes, and I found myself weeping uncontrollably all the time. Her heart became my heart, and I felt it aching so strongly that I thought I would fall sick. One evening, I went to Krishna and I said, "I cannot bear Radha's pain anymore." He replied calmly, "She must learn that I live in her heart, and there's no distance between us." I realized what he was trying to teach her, and so said nothing more. But the pain persisted, eating away at me, and so I went to him again and said, I will die if you do not relieve her of this suffering. I looked at him, wondering why he seemed not to care. Why was he not disturbed by her suffering as I was? And then I saw tears flooding his interior. On the exterior, he was as calm as a windless day, and yet inside, he was experiencing her pain every bit as much as she and I were. Then go to her, he replied calmly. You can relieve her suffering as well as I. I will relieve her pain and yours, Prabhu, I whispered. And so that night in my meditation, I went to Radha. I found her sobbing outside her cottage. Her family was asleep inside, and she was moaning as if in physical agony. It was a pitiful sight. I called out to her pleadingly, Radha, Radha, cease this weeping. I am drowning in your tears. She looked up, and when she saw me, she touched my feet and held them tightly and asked in a crying whisper, Mata, have I caused you to suffer? Your pain is my pain, I replied gently. I know no difference. Then take me to him, I beg you. I bent down and took her in my arms and said quietly, Oh, Radha, Radha, take you where? He is right here. He has never left you, not for a moment. How could he? He lives in your heart. Lifting her to a standing position, I dried her tears and said, Let us walk in the moonlight. We found a place to sit in her garden. Look, Radha, how Chandradev is accommodating us. It is not yet time for the full moon. Look how bright he has become, so that we may gaze upon one another. I took her hands in mine, and we sat quietly without speaking. There were no words to be said. But in that brief time, I knew that her eyes became filled with Krishna, and she saw him everywhere she looked. Just as years before she had transmitted to me the vision of her early life with Krishna when she touched my feet. As I now held her hands, I transmitted to her the Krishna that exists in every particle of the universe. From that moment on, Radha has never been apart from her beloved. Mata's voice had become like the gentlest of waves brushing over us, leaving a joyful calm. For me, it wasn't so much her words as the upliftment she transmitted, as if she had carried us into another realm far away from this earth. This was always the effect of being in her presence. Mata continued. Later, when I was back in Dwarka, I asked Krishna why he had put her through such agony. She looked at me with that playful smile of his and said this was her own choice. Then I saw what had transpired. Before Radha took birth, she was deep in meditation, absorbed in her Lord, but the thinnest film of separation still existed, and she couldn't extinguish it. At a certain moment, she caught the subtlest wave of thought as it entered her Lord, and she knew that the movement had begun for him to take birth in a human form. Without a moment's hesitation, she took birth first, so that she could express to him her yearning for union. She knew that on earth, he would erase that last remnant of separation. Mata smiled and continued, The Lord's play is never ending. He arranged it this way so that Radha's life would be an example for all, to show that only intense longing for the Lord will remove the last veil of separation and bring the ultimate union. Radha knew what she would have to endure on earth, the illusion of separation from her beloved, and she willingly accepted this role, knowing that her liberation would enable the liberation of so many. In her agony is the pain of every devotee longing for our Lord. It is that pain which carries one to final union. As she finished speaking, Mata smiled and said, But Radha also came to participate in the Leela of our Lord, a Leela which has brought so much joy to so many. Everyone was quiet, reluctant for Mata's story to end. But then one woman asked, The pain of separation that Radha felt, Was that like the pain Sita Rani felt when she was held captive in Lanka, separated from Sri Ram? Mata turned her eyes away from the gathering, gazed off into the distance without responding. Finally, she replied in a quiet and gentle tone, truthfully, there never was any separation between Sita and Ram. When Sita permitted herself to be taken to Lanka, she allowed that illusion of separation to come over her so that she would know more fully the human experience, what it is like to be under the spell of separation from the Lord. In this way, she gained a deeper understanding of what all people on earth endure. Later, when she and Ram returned to Ayodhya and she retreated to the forest to raise her son, one purpose was to demonstrate that separation is a concept of the mind with no true reality. Physical distance is no barrier to unity. If we know this truth, we know the unreality of death. We dream ourselves apart, but it is only a dream. This is one of the teachings of Ram and Sita. A flicker of emotion had crept into Mata's voice as she spoke about those two beloved figures from the past. She ended her talk by saying, "This is the truth that Radha exemplifies. She now lives always in the joy of the Lord's presence." When I heard this story, one of the things that struck me was how Ram had come to Soma to dispel the last illusion of separation, and how Rukmini went to Radha, the beloved of Krishna, to dispel that last illusion of separation. And this made me realize how much in concert Narayan and Narayani work. There's no separation. One does the work of the other. They're you know, Ram was acting as Sita would have. Rukmini was acting, Krishna had wanted her to do that, act on his behalf. Throughout this book, I'm seeing how much in concert they are working. And why I wondered, was this message coming through so clearly about this, this illusion of separation? When Sita awakens, when Soma awakens, she sees Sita everywhere. When Radha awakens, she sees Krishna everywhere. And that is the story of each one of us. That's what our life is about, is how do we get to the place where that final veil is lifted? And I realized, as I experienced reluctance in letting go of these books and losing my absorption or my full identity with the story as it's taking place, I fear that separation. And at this point, the only way I can counter that is to be engaged in these books. But I know that I'm hoping in the final moment that it will be with me always. That I won't even consider that I might not be in the presence of Ram and Sita, or now it's Krishna and Rukmini, and that Narayan and Narayani will be such a living reality that it doesn't matter what I'm doing or where I am. And I think that's the goal for each one of us. And so what I've done is I take phrases from these stories that I hear, like the Sita book, How Could I Leave the World When I Am the World? And when Rukmini says to Radha, where could you go? He's in your heart. Where can I take you? She says, take me to Krishna. Where can I take you? To me, that's another articulation of that same thought, that there is no place to go, but there's no being apart from that divine reality. So what is it that keeps us embraced in the illusion? A lot of it is our karma, our samskara that we haven't yet worked out. We have past desires, we have past ambitions, past relationships that need to be resolved. And all of life is really working through these samskaras. But we have to be mindful not to create new ones, because as we work out old patterns, we're creating new patterns. And so the story goes on. And so one of the things that I've learned through all of my experiences that I describe in the book is to be more mindful of the things that I say and think and do, so that you're not creating new patterns for yourself. I see that in my life today, I'm working out patterns from multiple different lives. And as I write about them, I can say, so that one goes back to that time. And I've repeated it 3 times since. And I could easily repeat it again if I don't really stop myself short and say, no, I'm going to break this pattern, this pattern of behavior or thinking. And so my hope is that in reading these books, that people really reflect on their own lives. I mean, what I show in another very touching part for me in the Sita book was in the last part, when Ram, when Meenakshi is reborn as Anasuya, and Ram in his last years has gone from household to household, really completing Sita's wishes from her beloved, the people who are around her in Mithila, putting people together. He's concerned about marriages. He's concerned about helping people find each other. That's the next step in their journey. So no detail was too minor. I thought to myself as I was writing that, but Ram was really concerned with every single family. He had learned that from Janak Baba, who knew every family in Mithila. He knew their needs, he knew their concerns, he knew their suffering. And he saw his role as attempting to alleviate the suffering. I mean, how far we've come in our world today from having leaders who are so focused on the suffering of every person in their sphere. The same thing happens actually in the Rukmini book, where there's a story of a deer who had, this is not in the Sita book, this comes out in the Rukmini book, a story of a deer, a doe, a small female deer, who shows up one day at Sita's, where Sita's living in the cottage in the forest, but her sons are still young. She had been separated from her family, and she ends up spending a lot of time living there, and the boys take care of her, and they want her as a pet, and Sita says she's not to be restrained, let her come and go as she does. And Sita pays a lot of attention to this deer who's completely devoted to her. Well, thousands of years later, a woman shows up at Rukmini's at the palace wanting to be her servant. Sita recognized her. This was the deer who had been so attentive to her. And Sita immediately takes her in. But Sita doesn't want her just to be a servant. Sita wants her to learn. She doesn't have much discrimination or thought capacity. And Sita would Rukmini would turn to her and say, "What do you think about this?" And she says, "Whatever you say, Mata." And Rukmini wanted her to learn how to develop her rational abilities. And so she was helping her take the next step on her journey, just like Sita was helping that deer move into the human realm. She was helping this devoted now servant take the next step in her evolution. And so there are many, and I realized that those who loved Sita, she had thousands and thousands and thousands of people that she interacted with during her journeys. And then remember when she and Ram travel the earth, when she's in meditation and they're traveling the earth, again, thousands and thousands of more people. Every contact that was made, a relationship was formed. And that continues on when Narayan and Narayani take birth again as Krishna and Rukmini. Those relationships again come into play so that she can help them take the next step on their journey. It's all about the unfolding, all about the return to our true nature, taking the next step on the spiritual journey that will bring us one step closer to full awakening. And that is why they're as active and as present today as ever, because the story is still unfolding for each one of us. The story is still unfolding. And so to me, the most touching part is the love that's displayed for each and every one of us, no matter whether we're conscious of or not, no matter what we do, whether we misbehave as we occasionally do. There's never a judgment or a lack of a full engagement in our unfolding. That is the quality of the love. What I experienced through writing the Sita book was a quality of love that is so rare within the human realm, and yet once you've experienced it, you can't be satisfied with anything less. Once you experience the quality of that love, and this comes through in different ways in the book that I've just finished, When the Bright Moon Rises, and again in the Rukmini book, that it's the quality of that love that we have to emulate and become if we are to really be of service to Narayan and Narayani on our earth. And increasingly, once you see that one wants to neutralize all the samskaras, end all the desires, finish with the ambitions, make peace with all the relationships, what is there left to do but to be of service to them and to help into the unfolding of the universe? So I think that's all I wanted to share today, just the journey that I've been on since I finished the Sita book. And as I said, it's an ongoing journey. I know that there's always more to remember. As I went back to the Vedic times, I said to myself, we've all lived for how long? Hundreds of thousands of years in different forms. They say I've heard it takes 1 million years of natural living to achieve full enlightenment, but many of those years are already finished. So we're reaching, those of us who are here in a meditation, in a spiritual organization, are already near the end of our journey. Full awakening is within reach. We have the practices, and that is a tremendous thing. Once you get the practices, how many lifetimes you have to search and yearn for a teacher, for practices that can speed up the journey, because we no longer want to wait for the natural evolution to unfold. We want to speed it up so that we can be of service more quickly. And so that's the process. Once you have meditation practices, the more devotedly we apply ourselves to those practices, the more we can exist and live in that higher realm of love that Sita and Ram manifested, and the more we could be their arms and legs and mouthpieces on this earth. So thank you all for inviting me to share my own experiences, and I always hope that they are helpful.
Thank you, ma'am. That was so beautiful. I actually didn't want you to stop. You actually took us to that times, and the most beautiful thing, the message that we have is in evolving better, how we have to get rid of the old patterns and behaviors by being mindful about what we talk and what we say. And it's about, like, you bring in those things here, but you became aware of them, and it's very important that you don't get tied up in those things, and instead try to evolve by doing more meditation practice and try to expand your consciousness. Thank you so much, ma'am, for those beautiful words of wisdom and for your joining us.